and welcome to another episode of the We United Voices of Innovation podcast. We are here today with Maria Gillespie and Amy Rooney, both who are on our chapter council. So I'm going to turn it over to them in just a second to introduce themselves. But why are we having this conversation today? We feel it's really important when we have global issues occur. How do we face these issues as leaders? How do we take all the information, gather it, and understand that we're leading people, sometimes through crisis, sometimes through tensions, but do we address it? Do we not address it? How do we manage these things? All leaders struggle with this. So in this conversation, we're going to talk to two leaders who have navigated already through COVID and some many other circumstances to gain the experience needed in order to navigate in today's complex and ever-evolving, ever-changing world. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our guests, Maria Gillespie first, and then we'll go to Amy. So Maria, can you introduce yourself, your company, and your title?
Yes. Hello. And thank you for having me, Jackie. Pleasure to be here with both of you wonderful ladies. So Maria Gillespie, as you mentioned, I work at TE. I am our channel sales leader, and I've been here for, wow, time flies. Actually, this month it will be 4 years, but I've been in the industry for about 20 years and had the pleasure of working at many different organizations in varying sizes and meet wonderful people along the way.
Awesome. Amy?
Amy Rooney. I am Director of Global Accounts for RFMW. RFMW is radio frequency microwave. So we are a distributor. And I've been here for 10 years, actually. I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary.
Well, congratulations. So we have two very qualified leaders who actually, you were both on our panel at the We United Summit. That was actually one of my favorite panels. It was an all-women panel talking about industry topics. And I really loved that panel. And I just think it's a fresh perspective for us all to engage in solutions for the industry and for leadership. So thank you for being here today. We are going to get right into it. And as usual, we address the tough topics at We United. We don't shy away from the things that people are typically thinking but not saying. Very hard in our world as we know it to have healthy debate, especially in the corporate world, right? We're a very politically driven society at this time. There's a lot of turmoil. A lot of people can't talk about things at work. However, all those unsaid things may be impacting our roles, right? And productivity in the workplace. So as leaders, how do we face issues nationally, geopolitically, and to lead through these circumstances, knowing there's always the next, right? There's always something else beyond what we're in now. So how do we take some best practices and apply to this moment that we're in right now? So I will just start with a question for both of you. First of all, before we get into how we lead through turmoil and crisis and turbulation, all this stuff, changes, so many things that go on. Where do you get your sources of information in order to stay on top of news that might be breaking, right? People have very different interpretations of the news. You might have people showing up with very different opinions. So what is your first line of default? Like, what do you do when headlines break? So I'll start with you, Amy.
I think for me, a couple of things are important. I try and find as neutral resources as possible. I know that We does have a list of resources that are recommended, and I find that to be really helpful. It's hard to find a neutral resource. So I think just having an organization like We that I do believe is credible, sort of vetting resources is really helpful. I do listen to a lot of National Public Radio, NPR, but I also try to have a cross-section of resources. So I'm not exclusively relying on one source. That can be pretty problematic and kind of create this situation of tunnel vision. So I try to have sort of a cross section of resources. Additionally, I try not to just use US resources because I think that also can be problematic and limiting. So I try to incorporate international resources as well.
Nice. I love that answer. And thank you for the plug, by the way. We do really care about credible, neutral sources of information, and that leaders need to be equipped with all the facts and data. So thank you for that. Maria, I'll go to you.
No, thank you. And I echo that. goal, Amy, on trying to have a balance, right? And for me, it's not one or the other, right? It's just really everything, because you could easily find something that will make you feel good about whatever position or whatever side of the fence that you're on. So I think for me, it's more about self-awareness about what I'm reading and how I'm interpreting the information. So not one place, it's just multitude. And I actually will look for, when I find something that is very far left or far right, I go and then I intentionally find the opposite. So just for me, it's because I am, number one, trying to understand the perspective and the lenses that people are reading things through, or even that I may be inadvertently hearing it or reading it through based on my own personal lived experiences, because I think that that's a big impact. So where do I get my information? Really everywhere. I try to use different sources and different places, because even that's sometimes contaminated. I'll use that word for different reasons. And it's an ever changing world. Even those news resources, right, can be influenced by that very thing. And so just honestly, just keeping different pulses on different things, and the more viewpoints then I can interpret on my own, based on my own opinions, values, and lived experiences, is kind of how I go about it.
Well, that leads me to my next question. As leaders, we're just human beings. We're all just people, right? And we can try to force ourselves to be as neutral as possible, but there are sometimes circumstances where things can be a little bit emotionally charged, right? There are global events and national events that happen that people feel very passionate about. So how is it as a leader? And I will just say, in this moment in time, there are probably, the majority of leaders probably struggle with this topic. How do you separate yourself from your viewpoints or your thoughts of a situation to show up and be incredibly neutral so that you are representing everyone in the organization? I would say, as a human being, it's probably one of the most difficult things to do, because some things do draw that line, right? So I will ask you both, when there are probably more rare circumstances, but when that faces you, how do you manage those situations? And I'll start with you, Amy.
I'm going to kind of go back to Maria's response about resources, because I think that's very applicable here. I think that to convince yourself that you're neutral or completely objective is just, I don't know how accurate that is. I think everybody wants to believe that they're neutral and objective. I don't think that anybody truly is. And that's because we all have lived experiences. That's because, things have shaped us. People and events have shaped us. So I think what's more important than showing up in a neutral fashion, which again is a great objective, but I think maybe what's more feasible or within reach is just to try and be self-aware and be aware of your bias, not say that it doesn't exist or try and convince anybody else that it doesn't exist, but just to be aware of how your lived experiences have shaped you and how that might be affecting how you show up. And I think the other thing is to show up curious. So Maria's point about, looking at everything, I think is applicable here as well. I think that you need to be sort of open to everything. And instead of building the case as you're listening to the information, which I think we all do, I think remaining open and remaining curious and kind of challenging whatever's coming up for you in the moment and just getting curious about the other perspective.
Wow. Maria, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's similar, but I will also say, and this is more so just personal experience and learning, has been that not everything needs a response, right? Not everything needs an answer. Not everything needs that space. And so you will fundamentally, if you stand for anything, disagree with someone at some point. And I can honestly say that I have yet to be in a room where I just personally know that I have varying viewpoints, and that's okay. And so accepting that very thing that we are trying to be, which is as neutral as you can be, there's the beauty in the opposite, which is what's different in all of us. And so you can have a boundary of respecting somebody else's viewpoint without compromising your own. So knowing, to Amy's point, your own values, your own awareness, and being that and allowing that space, and knowing that by listening to someone else's viewpoint does not mean that you have to react, action, take it in, hold it, carry it, absorb it. But you do have a duty, specifically as a leader, because now I'm going kind of back into, the corporate world, is to be a stabilizing force, and strong enough, I guess, or at least aware enough to know that, hey, I will be in situations and in places where we don't agree, and that's okay. And creating and allowing that space, and knowing that you yourself and your values and your beliefs are not changing because of that. And again, coming back to those things. So having a disagreement or having a different viewpoint or looking at something differently, and that self-awareness, but then also knowing that if you do get to that point with yourself, that you've had that internal discussion and you don't align, or then you do align, that is aligned with you personally and your values and what you as a person stand for and believe in. So when you can do that and be so grounded in your own stability, I think you find it much easier to provide stability for other people, even though you may not agree with them. And that's okay. There needs to be space for that.
There is a lot of value in the power of the pause. I think we're also very used to, in our society, very quick, immediate responses. And it's not always the case that people don't care if they don't speak out initially. Some of the most wise leaders I know, you don't hear from them at first, but when they come out and speak, it's been very well thought out. It's been very well thought through very critically. So I think that we also have to fight that urge to react instantly, even though it might be something that really comes against, who we are as a person. I also think, the fascinating thing about leadership, and this is the moment, we hear all these things about emotional intelligence. I mean, how long have we been talking about this? It is essential for leaders to be emotionally intelligent, because everybody suffers when they're not. So what you described, Maria, is incredibly important. And that's a matter of emotional intelligence. It's called maturity, right? And as leaders, if there's other people you're leading and they're not demonstrating that, it is not the time to be in leadership. So I think that what we have to also acknowledge is that we're just in times, and I think we're going into it for a very long period of time, that we have to understand our values, number one. We have to understand how we want to lead, how we want to show up, but we also have to be able to hold others accountable when they're not showing up in the fashion of we would expect, right? So I think this is the time for corporations, for leaders, for everybody to decide these very important decisions. And it is different, I understand, for everybody, right? But it is a time to know your values, know what you stand for, right? And lead accordingly. I think it's just a very important time to do that. So anyway, moving on from that, we really have had a lot of circumstances, and I've been thinking about this a lot leading up to this discussion, because, I remember during COVID, right? Even though it was a time we were all going through this major crisis together, people were united. People were coming together because we were all facing the same thing together. It was almost like the issue versus us. Like, corporations were showing great compassion and humanitarian leadership. And I feel like I bonded more during that time with people in the industry than I ever have. So there was a blessing in all of that we all kind of just saw each other as human beings in that moment. So I want to pause there for a minute and just ask you both, you were leading teams, during that time. What were your major learning lessons leading through that type of immediate crisis where we all had to readjust a lot of things and start leading in a very humanitarian way? So I'll just turn it over. Maybe I'll start with you, Amy.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, Jackie, that emotional intelligence is so important. And I think COVID really showed us that as well, right? People were going through an unprecedented event in our lifetimes. And so I think emotional intelligence is not just a nicety. It's not just sort of a soft skill. I think that, there's plenty of data to support the idea that psychological safety is a huge predictor of success.
Yeah.
And I think that COVID bore that out as well. And so I think creating psychological safety for your teams, for your organization, is not just something that's a nice to have. I think it's something that is critical to have. I think it directly impacts the success of teams, the success of individuals, the success of an organization. So I think that's really key. I think that COVID also made us very intentional about our communication. So it wasn't the case anymore that everyone was going to the office and just seeing and connecting with people. You had to be very intentional with not only the frequency of connection, but the quality of connection that you had with people, because it's just not the same over Zoom. So I think just, it created an intentionality around connection that I think was really beneficial, actually. And I think adaptability, it was something, again, that was unprecedented for us. So I think a lot of times people view adaptability as responding to, something unexpected, which it absolutely is. But I think that adaptability should be a practice, not just an exception when something unusual happens. So I think kind of pulling from that experience, those are things that we can carry into the way that we move going forward that are just good practices.
I love that answer. Thank you, Amy. What about you, Maria?
Yeah, I think that COVID reminded us of the things that we called soft, right, were actually the foundation. And relationships in that vein proved to be the real infrastructure of what then proceeded to unravel over the time span of that, right? So systems broke, schedules changed, everything fell apart, but that trust and that leaning into humanity is really what moved faster than any process, if you think about it, right? Flexibility increased. We had to, because there was no other way. And when we treated adults like adults, most rose to the occasion, right? So freedom without responsibility failed, but responsibility with freedom really thrived. And that's what I saw, right? So, and we've changed so much. Like, you even hear about how after COVID, there's also changes to go back. And it's a challenge, right? Just, I think as a whole, as a society, we changed how we tackled what life balance looked like and what all these things look like, right? And we found joys in different things and the time, and all of that is positive, I think, from a otherwise not so fun time, I'll call that. But it was just really lessons that are far beyond a pandemic. They're really lessons that they're for marriages, classrooms, communities, workplaces, right? And that's the emotional piece, is that the awareness. And I think it was very much you talk about the soft skill. It really became something that you had to practice because people were dealing with very different things. But I think our palate in our society, our palate for even just having a Zoom where you had, a kid come on and wave because you're all in one house and in one place, it softened us all.
Yeah.
To the reality of the humanity and the purpose behind why we do what we do every day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think it brought to light this beautiful piece, this wonderful detrimental piece, which is about our families and about the people that we love and care about. That is why we show up to do this. And it almost created a space for us to be able to do them both. And I've always talked about work-life, not balance. It was work-life synergy. Right.
Oh.
And because in my personal role, there's times where one's more demanding than the other, and vice versa. Certainly when I'm traveling and I'm gone all week, there's no balance really, right? There's just very limited. So when you kind of got to see that during COVID, we all had to kind of step up our emotional, our EQ game, right? Because that was just reality. And I thought that while it was a challenging time, that leaders had to be human first. Titles didn't comfort people. We were all people. We all put our pants on the same way, right? One leg at a time. And I think that the leaders that people followed were the ones who checked in on hearts before numbers and checklists, and I think that was key.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Maria. And I think what I remember the most about COVID is that people would get on a call and ask first, how are you? How's your family? How you doing? And it was more that personal side first right? And you really got to know people in that vein before business. And I really, truly believe it strengthened business. I really do. I think it also showed us that there's more options available to us. But mostly the trust. I would say that, Condoleezza Rice is somebody I really look up to for her way of leading through many different circumstances. And she says something. She says, trust is something that's very hard to build. It's over years of credibility over a period of time, and it can be destroyed quickly and you'll never get it back. And I just feel that time was so trust building for so many people. And as we, take all that time into now, remembering whatever happens, always maintaining that trust, always knowing that everything we decide either adds to or takes away the trust. And I agree with her in the sense of incredibly difficult once you lose trust to get it back. I actually don't think in a business sense it's even possible. And really a lot of people said it was looking back, right? When we were all in it, was like, oh my gosh, we were all cooking meals and working and, homeschooling kids and all kinds of stuff going on. But almost everyone I talked to says that was one of the best times of their life. They had time with their families. They bonded with their families. There's a lot of good that came of it. And as a leader, this is the important question leading up to this is, do you feel that there's such a need to go back to the times before COVID? Because now we're so used to being beyond COVID. Are we truly taking those learning lessons we just talked about and directly applying it right now? I'm going to ask you both that question. So Maria, I'll start with you.
I think there's just a human nature of going back to that. And then you have both sides of opinion on, hey, yes, going back is what I'd like to do or not, right? So I think that there's both to look at. But I think we would be foolish not to look at what we could keep and leave, right? There's certain things like certainly I could live without the living, like every day was a fire that burns you out. So we could leave that.
Yeah.
There has to be a balance. I do think that we're still in kind of the learning of what that looks like going forward and what permanent looks like, right? Because there was life before COVID and life after COVID. And there's a need for organizations to stabilize the business when we're talking about that reality. And it was disruptive, I think, at first. And I think that, overall as a nation and as a world, we did well to stabilize ourselves as quickly as we could. But, that's not sustainable over time. So as we look at what's going forward, and we're looking at it in ever-changing scenarios, when we bring AI into the mix and we consider technology, I think that kind of just took us forward, right? Being able to have Teams and Zoom and all of that and conducting business in that way changed the game. It changed the game, and if we can do that and implement it, and then also respect the time and that synergy and balance that I talked about earlier, we could be very successful as just in society in general, right? Because if we can use the tools that we have to our advantage without losing the connection of the face-to-face, and balancing that, and then respecting schedules, because I don't know about you, but it feels like it has gone a little bit, got very, very used to the flexibility, right? That the flexibility then goes to the other end of the spectrum where you're just on all the time, right? So I think that we're in that kind of uncomfortable moment where we are accepting all of these great things that we learned in that moment of just survival. And when you're in the survival, you're not really considering it, right? And now we've come out of that, and we're looking at what does the world looks like now and how we execute, utilizing all the things that we learned during COVID by tapping into the technology. And then, oh, by the way, AI is, increasing in its uptick and uptake. And so we need to just look at how we then execute in the learned world of all of these things. And for me, I'll just give you a quick, I do set some time aside to have work, right? I have to put it on my calendar to create space for that work, because if I'm not pausing to think about the strategy, about how I'm going to lead my team, if I'm not creating that space, I am failing. I'm failing as a leader. I'm failing my organization because I'm busy, right? And busy is not productive. There's a misconception there. So for me, it's just grounding myself. And then, okay, so now we've got expectations of how we are to move forward because of all these resources and tools that we established during COVID because of a need. And then how then I then utilize these tools going forward where I still create boundaries so that I can execute my role and my mission in the right way. And so I have to create those, because if I don't, right, it will easily just take over like with anything else.
Yes. Amy?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think I experienced the same thing where coming out of COVID, certainly there are things, all the things that we talked about that were benefits and, I guess realizations during that time that are lessons that I think we all realize we can and should be implementing now, but do we? I don't know. I don't know that I do. And I think I want to, and I recognize the value of it. And I think a lot of people do, but it's so busy right now. There's so much going on. There's so much input. There's so much going on in the world. I mean, we did not have a slowdown during the holidays. In years past, we have, customers had their production facilities, shut down for 2 weeks over the holidays. And that did not happen last year. It just was, full sprint all through the holidays. So did I implement those practices? I don't know that I did a great job of that. I just was trying to get things done. And I think when you're kind of just trying to get through the day and get things done, you lose a lot of those practices that, you conceptually realize the benefit of, but maybe just can't, fit in. So I think what Maria is talking about having to be intentional about creating space for the things that to be valuable is so key, because we can have the ideal and we can recognize its value, but unless you make space or make a habit of implementing it into your routine, it just doesn't, you're not reaping the benefits of those lessons.
Yeah. So that's why I love these podcasts, because it's a good reminder. It sounds so simple, but it really is a good reminder. And I do, I have some more questions for you both, because we are in, the COVID, the foundation of what we learned there, and us talking about this, it really is important, because as we're facing our future, I mean, we have some actually very, very serious global circumstances right now that could impact business so drastically, just like we were back in COVID, right? It could disrupt the entire supply chain. And we could find ourselves there, once again, not that we're not busy as it is. So what do you all define? Like this is the major question, because when we talked ahead of time and we were kind of chatting through what would be the viable topics that most leaders would be feeling at this moment. One thing that came up that is still really I've been thinking through is we were talking about crisis and what does define a crisis. When COVID hit, we were all in it together and there was no getting around it. There's just, everybody was in it together. But in this moment, how each leader defines what a crisis is really dependent on how they're going to address their organization or not. So I do want to address that question, because this, I think, is where everyone needs to take a pause in leadership and understand and really define, what do you as a leader define as a crisis? I don't think it's the same for everyone, right? A crisis to me would be, something that would obviously impact business, a business crisis, I should say. And so what is it as a leader you decide? We have a lot of circumstances that go on in our nation and around the world. Some people, like we said before, some people are impacted more than others, but how do we know how our teams are feeling? How do we know what's going on with them? Because sometimes things happen and you're just a little paralyzed just because you're a human being, right? So that's where I wanted to pause for a minute and say to you both, because I don't know that everybody has all the right answers. I don't know that anybody's really talking about this, but what is it to you that defines a crisis? Amy?
Yeah, I think for me, what you talked about, impact, is really critical. As you mentioned, COVID impacted all of us. We're sort of all in the same bubble. I think there are things going on in the world that are impacting us all very differently. So I think not just being aware of what is impacting me as an individual and as a leader, but what is impacting others, and what is creating high impact, what is escalating quickly for others, what is presenting them with a challenge that's impacting in the way that they show up, or is impacting their nervous system as an individual. I think those are all things to me that make a determination about whether or not there's a crisis. It could not impact me at all. I'll give you a specific example. I was on a call with our team internally, and one of the team members that was calling into the call said, "I apologize ahead of time if I have to drop from the call." He's based in Israel, and he said, "If we have a raid, I'm going to have to leave and go to a shelter." And that just really hit me, because I had so many other things on my mind that day. And yes, world events is heavily on my mind every day. But for him, it was like, I have 90 seconds to get to this shelter. So if I drop, that's why. And that's super high impact for him, right? That is immediate for him. That is potentially quickly escalating for him. So me being aware of that is a crisis. It's maybe not my crisis. I'm not living in that environment, but it is a crisis because it is high impact. It is quickly escalating for somebody in my organization. And that's something that I need to be very aware of.
Right. So Maria, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think the most important thing I've learned is that crisis isn't universal. It's very personal. What feels like a crisis to one person is maybe something that's manageable because it's filtered to what we talked about earlier, right? Values, experiences, responsibilities. That was very more realistic and tangible, I think, in that example, Amy, right? Because that's obviously happening, and that's different. But to that point, for a parent, a crisis might mean that there's anything that's threatening their child or their sense of security. For somebody that's struggling financially, one bill could just rip the ground right under them, right? Yeah. So I think that, before I can label something a crisis, and I don't think that that's even relevant, I think that I don't get to define someone else's fear. And if I know that, then that's okay. Because I know, and it's my responsibility. So what I define is I know that for myself, but knowing that I don't get to define someone else's crisis or what they may perceive as that, and then just lead with humanity and peace, creating the open space for that conversation, listening without absorbing what isn't mine to carry, because I have to then, if I don't separate that, I cannot carry it all for everyone, right? And what everyone deems that. I can be mindful, I can be supportive, I can and I'm grateful for our organization and the resources that we have, right, to point people in directions and how we can get and support and create that support. But I think and I don't want to sound oversimplistic here, but just creating the space. Like I said before, I can tell you, I don't think I've been in a room where everybody agrees with me ever. And that's okay. But I take a lot of pride in the fact that I even have a team with very diverse viewpoints and what they would define as a crisis in one scenario or not. That we all come together as a team and respect one another, and we can do that. And you create that, I think, often by, to your point earlier, even just stopping and allowing you can know someone and they can share things with you. And the biggest mistake you can make is making it about you, right? So the moment that you are just there for whatever that moment is, or that situation, or that perspective, or that viewpoint, it isn't your job to prove your point ever. And that goes for anything, even outside of the workplace. It's to sit in that space with them and to allow that to happen. Sometimes it's technology.
Yep, I agree with that. And I think that, like I said, I've thought about this quite a bit, and I hop on meetings with people all the time, all around the globe, right? What I've defined it for myself, and again, this could be different for everybody. For myself, I've realized when people are seeing global things together in unison on their phones, like we might have some headlines like what we've just experienced recently, and people are seeing really traumatic things, images, they're seeing these things. When we talk about human life, that's where I personally draw the line to say people's nervous systems at that point, whatever, how you feel about anything, there's an impact when you see things, images on your phone that will impact your nervous system. So I truly believe, this is my opinion, validation is essential. So we don't have to be the ones having all the answers. We don't have to have people agreeing on where they are with anything. But I do think it's very important, from my perspective, when there's global circumstances, to offer a validation that something is happening here. And, that there is a safe space in that organization that we do at least acknowledge people might be feeling a little unsettled right now, right? Even just mentioning and acknowledging that this is happening, I think is very important. That's just my perspective. And I also think that the grounding force in everything, what's uniting force, is that humanity. So when, the world divides, community unites. And so I've noticed, even in the past, couple of weeks, I've actually bonded more with some people that I strongly disagree with. And when it all comes down to holding the space for them, holding the understanding, them holding the understanding, you all come back to the same middle. There was something very humanitarian based why they formed their opinions one way, and you can come back together. And so for me, I also think as leaders, it takes an incredible amount of leadership discernment, emotional maturity that we talked about, to what you said, Maria, is so important, to create that safe space for people and to understand that everyone has their own viewpoints because of how they've been conditioned, right? And so it is one of the hardest jobs in the world as we go into the future, is leaders. And thank you both, Maria and Amy, for being those leaders who can lead through not only industry crisis, but whatever global crisis comes, that we need leaders who are grounded, who are fact-based, who hold a space for people having a hard time, but yet know that they have to get business done. I mean, this is the reality of leadership today. So anybody thinking of leadership, wanting a leadership role, is not all it's cracked up to be in a lot of cases. And be very careful what you ask for, because if you're put in that position, you must rise to the occasion, like these ladies have.
Also in that, it's important, right? But holding the space, we also have a responsibility to help move forward, right? So
Yes.
as we're in that moment and creating that space, we can't live there, right? So just being aware of over validation and not replacing that, right, with something, and just being there and walking with someone doesn't mean taking their backpack, right? Because then you can't pivot and then support someone else who, by the way, might have a completely different experience at the moment, right? So just to that point, we have to just know the difference, that not every discomfort has to be rescued, but sometimes it just needs to be heard and then walked through. What's the next possible step, right, to get out of that place, if it is something that is overwhelming someone to that point, right?
Yep. So any final thoughts? I'd love that, Maria. Thank you so much. These podcasts always go by so fast. It's like I have so many other things I would love to talk to you about. But I think for this particular topic, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, creating a psychologically safe environment is key. I think that's, fundamental for everything that we've been discussing. And in times of crisis, I think sharing what you know, but also sharing what you don't know, and just being committed to transparent communication throughout the process. I think to Maria's point about being a stabilizing force, we have to admit we can't fix everything. We have to admit that we don't know everything, but just being very clear about that, I think, does create a sense of stability. It creates a sense of joint investment, I think, in how to move forward. And I think that's what we need from leadership right now.
Yeah, I think addressing charge headlines can risk division and distraction, and equally avoiding them, you can appear indifferent or out of touch, right, as a leader. So I think the goal isn't to react to every issue, but to respond to the people, right, and acknowledging concerns without turning, a safe space into a debate stage. So speaking to values, dignity, safety, fairness, just fundamental things that we all can align on, rather than partisan positions. I think that's probably what's more important.
Yes, I agree with you. And I also want to, my final thoughts on this too, is that it's really important, as a leader, you have the ability to change your mind. You get new information, you change your mind. I think it's really important for us all to know that people are in a discovery process. I think as humans, as corporations, as a nation right now, people are actually pushed to kind of dig deep, I think, on some critical issues. And I also think it's very important. Granted, I'm very much a journalist in my heart and soul. And seeking truth for me is super important, but also knowing you can change your mind. I think it's very important for leaders to know, in a business sense, especially, we all know this. You think one way based on the information. You react and you put plans in place based on the information. If the information changes and it's proven and it's credible, you change courses, and that's no big deal. As humans, we have to understand we have that ability to change our minds at any time, right? Based on new, incredible information. So I think it's very important all of us hold the space for each other, hold the space, and really give your leaders credit. I'm really always thinking and really mindful of our leaders in the industry and everything everybody's gone through up to this point, and leading into the future can be amazing. We have AI and all kinds of explosive technologies taking off. With that comes a lot of responsibility as well, and a lot of challenges. So anyway, with that thank you so much for the conversation today. I think it's very relevant, very current, and very important. So thank you for being here.